Hello, welcome to Quackalope, and you might be wondering why the set is so unusually sparse right now. There's nothing on the table except a duck and a quarter. And that's because I want to talk to you about how you can play D&D or any sort of fantasy-based role-playing game for exactly 25 cents, or 5 cents, or 10 cents, or $1 if you have a $1 coin. So I went home for the holidays this year and was hanging out with my little nephew, who's about 8 years old right now. And he was interested in the idea of board games, the idea of D&D and role-playing games. And I was talking to him about all the different things I had, right? I have the books and the binders, I have the player character sheets, I have dice trays and a player mat with felt tip markers that allow me to write and erase. I had a stack of cards when I was running a campaign. I had pages and pages of research, and I'd spend hours every week preparing the best D&D campaign that I could for my role-playing group. And that was great, and we had a fantastic time. It was one of the best experiences that I've had, and I certainly hope that I can have more of those experiences in the future. But the reality is, the real value in a D&D game, the real value in a role-playing game, comes down to a flip of a coin and your imagination. And he was curious what D&D was, right? He's 8, 9 years old. He probably can't manage all of the player stats and the upgrades and the different gear and the economic decisions and dynamics that go into a full campaign game. But what he has in spades is imagination. And that's all you need. That's my favorite part. The best part for me about a role-playing game is the role-playing itself. It's about getting together with friends and having a little bit of food and just telling a tale, talking about a story, going on a journey together, and seeing what happens. Any good DM will know and admit that the players take full control of the game. And you might have structures in place that help guide them along, or pathways that, no matter which trail they go down, they're probably going to run into the hag or they're going to come across a zombie, but they're always going to subvert your expectations. And so the best thing you can do, if you want to be a DM, if you want to teach your nephew or your niece about role-playing, about board gaming, about this community that we have, is to sit down and just stretch the boundaries of your imagination. And so that's exactly what I did with him. I didn't have any of my books, I didn't have my cards, I didn't have miniatures that I'd painted by hand, I didn't have a table display where we could lay everything out and have this epic visual campaign in front of us, but I did have my voice, I did have a coin, and we both had our minds. We both had our imagination, and so I asked him what kind of character he'd like to be. Would he like to be an archer or a dwarf? Is he interested in being a human or an elf or some other mix and breed? And he came up with an elf-human hybrid who was a hero and had a big broadsword and also a bow and arrow or a crossbow strung to his side. And everything that he said was perfectly fine. Every idea he had, I could fit into a story in one way or another. And so I asked him who he wanted to be, what sort of gear or weapons he'd have on him. And he told me. I helped guide him a little bit, asking, specific questions about the gear that he had, or where he might have found that sword, or what his favorite weapon was, or maybe what he was on a journey to do. And then we started spinning a tale together. I gave him 2 options about the narrative that we could tell. I could say, do you want to be on a mountain cliff, exploring the ruins of an ancient city, or do you want to be wandering through a forest, hunting down the goblin chief? And he chose to do the forest. And so I started talking to him about it. I talked about the trees and the brush. I talked about him walking down this narrow pathway and seeing an animal trail skirt to the side. I talked about the wind whipping through his hair and the faint smell of smoke coming somewhere from the distance. He paused, started asking questions, said that he wanted to go in the direction of the smoke, and so I talked to him about that. And so I started talking about him walking through the forest. As he leaves the small trail, leaves and twigs start piling up an uncleared forest floor, and he starts breaking twigs. You can hear the cracking and the crunching of every step he takes. And I had him flip a coin. And with anticipation, he took the coin and flipped it, and it was tails. He failed the roll because it was a simple yes or no, 1 or 2, pass or fail, like rolling a d20 with only a 20 and a 1. A stick cracked loudly under his foot, and he heard in the distance a group of muffled voices start whispering louder and louder. And then, from the sides, he heard footsteps spinning around on both sides of him. And I asked him what he wanted to do. And he said, I turn to my left, I draw my arrow, and I fire. And I said, flip a coin. And so he did. And it was tails. The arrow spun through his bowstring, hitting a tree and quivering with a loud, tangible dong as it sat there. And from behind the tree, he saw this goblin peek out, drawing a rusty scabbard, looking at him. And I said, flip a coin. And he did. And it was a heads. And he passed. I said, in front of you, you see the goblin step behind the tree, drawing a rusty scabbard, but from behind you, you also hear the sound of a crossbow being loaded and the drawstring being pulled back. Kink, clicking, just about to fire. What do? And he said, I turn, I fire my bow at the other goblin. Flicked a coin. It was a tail. I said, you turn around to fire the bow, but it's too late. The arrow comes hissing through the woods, striking you in your shoulder, pinning just beneath the leather armor that you have. You feel a little bit of pain, but you're not wounded too badly. What do? He says, I drop my bow, I draw my sword, and I charge. I said, flip a coin. And he flipped his coin. I said, it's a heads. You rush forward, swinging your broadsword at the goblin. How do you want to do this? And he said, I want to chop off his head. And I said, that's exactly what you do. You swing your broadsword, chopping right through his neck, pinning it into the tree. His head goes rolling down the hill with a look of surprise on his face. What do you do next? He says, I pull my sword from the tree. I said, flip a coin. He flips a coin. It's a tail. I say, your sword is stuck in the tree. What are you going to do? He says, I grab my dagger and I throw it at the goblin behind me. I said, flip a coin. And he does, and it's a heads. You throw your dagger, catching the other goblin directly between the eyes. He kind of gurgles and moans, stepping backward with surprise, and falls, slumped across the grass. I say all that, and I do all that to emphasize what a D&D campaign is all about. And that's just a silly experiment, and it's loosely based off of the experience I had with him. But I want to emphasize the point. You can play D&D with anything, as long as you have a good story and your imagination. It takes 25 cents. It takes the flip of a coin. A yes or a no, a success or a fail, because at the end of the day, all you're doing is crafting a story together. You're just telling a narrative. And so if you have young children, friends that are interested in what D&D is, maybe a little nephew like me, who might be tricked into playing a longer campaign with you in the future, get them started. Start telling a story together. It's what we as humans do. It's been our universal language for generation upon generation. And we continue it in this community. Through our role-playing games, through the adventures we spin and the narratives we weave. And I want to encourage you to continue doing it. For a long time, I didn't play role-playing games because I thought the barrier to entry was way too high. I thought I needed the D&D books, I thought I needed the dice and the character sheets, and I had to understand all of the rules and dynamics that went into a game. And those things are amazing. The folks over at D&D or any of the other big role-playing games have usually put a ton of time into crafting a narrative experience and crafting a game system that functions. They've taken the weight off your shoulders a little bit. As a DM, we're grateful for it, because we can spend hundreds of hours of campaign without having to come up with all the systems ourselves. But it all really just boils back down to the flip of a coin, to your imagination, to the story you're telling together, and to 25 cents, a yes or a no, and a story. I hope I've encouraged some of you to give it a try, or try it out in a different way. There's a lot of value in stretching the boundaries of your imagination without all the frill. Please engage with me in the comment section down below. I want to hear your story about role-playing games. Role-playing games, D&D specifically, were how I first got into this community as an adult. I tried out a D&D intro session at a local gaming store, and it introduced me to the wider world of role-playing and D&D and board games, and so it holds a really special place for me. It's where I started falling in love again with this kind of nerd culture that we have. Once again, thank you for watching. I'll see you on the next episode. Remember to do the important thing. Get out and play some games.